At 7:42 a.m. on December 18, 1944, Private First Class Robert Hendricks sat behind a 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun on the southern perimeter of Bastogne, Belgium, and tried to stop his hands from shaking. He was 19 years old, 3 weeks in theater, 0 combat experience on anti-aircraft weapons. The metal of the gun was cold enough to freeze skin on contact. 8 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that made your breath crystallize instantly. Made your fingers numb inside wool gloves. Made the mechanism of the Bofors sluggish and reluctant. Hendricks could hear artillery in the distance, German 88mm guns, maybe 3 miles out. The sound rolled across the frozen Belgian countryside like thunder that never stopped. He could smell cordite from the morning's mortar barrage. Could smell frozen earth and diesel fuel and something else. Something like meat left in a freezer too long. That was the smell of Bastogne in December 1944. Death and cold and fear mixed together. The sky was gray, overcast. Low clouds at maybe 3,000 feet. Above that, nothing but gray emptiness stretching to 12,000 feet where German reconnaissance bombers flew every morning, photographing, plotting, preparing. In 17 minutes, 38 German Panzer tanks would attack the position Hendricks was supposed to defend. He didn't know that yet. Nobody knew that. But the tanks were already there, 3 miles south, engines warming, commanders checking maps, waiting for the order to advance, waiting to kill 1,600 American soldiers who had no anti-tank defenses and no warning and no chance. Unless a scared 19-year-old kid made a mistake. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded. 18,000 American soldiers trapped inside a pocket 15 square miles across. They'd been surrounded for 6 days. Since December 12th, when German forces cut the roads north and south. When Panzer divisions closed the circle. When Bastogne became an island in the middle of enemy territory. Outside that 15 square mile pocket, 4 German Panzer divisions were tightening the noose. 2nd Panzer Division to the north. Panzer Lehr Division to the west. 26th Volksgrenadier Division to the east. 5th Parachute Division to the south. Total German strength, 48,000 men, 200 tanks, 300 artillery pieces, all pointed at 18,000 surrounded Americans. The math was simple and brutal. Americans were outnumbered nearly 3-to-1, outgunned, cut off from supply, running low on ammunition, medical supplies, food. The weather kept Allied aircraft grounded. No air support, no resupply drops, no reinforcements. German artillery hit Bastogne every day. Random harassment fire, 88mm guns, 105mm howitzers, 150mm guns, not concentrated barrages, just random. Shells landing every few minutes, keeping Americans nervous, keeping them in their holes, killing them 1 or 2 at a time. In 6 days, the 101st Airborne had lost 314 men killed, 647 wounded. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Morphine was being rationed. Surgeons were reusing bandages. The aid station smelled like gangrene and blood and desperation. Every morning for 6 days, German reconnaissance aircraft had appeared. Heinkel He 111 bombers, twin-engine aircraft, cruising altitude 12,000 feet. They flew over Bastogne in formation, 9 aircraft usually, sometimes 12. They photographed American positions, mapped defensive lines, identified artillery concentrations, command posts, supply dumps, everything the German artillery needed to know. American anti-aircraft guns fired at them. 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikon, 50 caliber machine guns, all ineffective. The German aircraft flew too high. The effective ceiling for a Bofors gun against aircraft was 8,000 feet, maybe 9,000 in perfect conditions. The Heinkels flew at 12,000, safe, untouchable. American commanders knew German tanks were out there. Intelligence reports confirmed it. Radio intercepts mentioned Panzer movements. Prisoners talked about tank concentrations, but nobody knew exactly where. The Germans moved at night, camouflaged during the day, used terrain and weather and good field craft to stay hidden. 6 days of reconnaissance flights. 6 days of German eyes photographing everything. 6 days of Americans waiting for the attack they knew was coming, but couldn't predict. And Hendricks, 19 years old, sitting behind a gun he barely knew how to operate, was about to change everything. Robert Hendricks was born March 7, 1925, in Duluth, Minnesota. Grew up near the waterfront. Father worked the ore docks. Mother worked as a seamstress. 2 younger sisters, working-class family. Not poor, not comfortable, somewhere in between. He enlisted June 19, 1943, 18 years old, just graduated high school. The war had been going for 18 months. Most of his friends had already enlisted. Hendricks didn't wait for the draft. Walked into the recruitment office downtown, signed the papers, took the oath. The Army sent him to Fort Benning, Georgia. Basic training, 13 weeks. Then infantry training, 8 weeks. They made him a rifleman. Military occupational specialty, 11 Bravo. Infantry rifleman. Not a specialist, not a gunner, just a rifleman who carried a weapon and followed orders. He was assigned as an ammunition bearer for a machine gun squad. His job was simple. Carry ammunition boxes, feed belts to the gunner, keep the gun supplied during combat. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't technical, but it kept the gun firing, and that kept people alive. Hendricks arrived in Europe November 27, 1944. 3 weeks before Bastogne, the port at Le Havre, France. Cold rain, gray skies, mud everywhere. They trucked him to a replacement depot, waited 4 days, got assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Easy Company. His first combat was December 12th, the day the Germans surrounded Bastogne. Hendricks was in a truck convoy heading into town when Panzer units cut the road behind them. They made it inside the perimeter. Barely. The trucks behind them got hit. 37 men killed in that convoy. Hendricks saw the burning vehicles, saw the bodies. That was his introduction to war. He'd been in Bastogne 6 days, lived in a foxhole, ate 1 meal a day sometimes. K rations when they were available. Sometimes nothing. Slept maybe 3 hours a night. The cold kept you awake. The artillery kept you awake. The fear kept you awake. Hendricks had fired his weapon twice in combat. Both times at distant targets he couldn't clearly see. German infantry probing the perimeter. He didn't know if he'd hit anything. Probably not. Most infantrymen didn't hit anything. They just fired in the general direction of the enemy and hoped. He'd never fired a Bofors anti-aircraft gun in combat. Had fired one twice during training, both times at stationary ground targets, old trucks placed in a field. He'd hit them because they weren't moving and he had time to aim carefully. But he'd never tracked an aircraft, never calculated lead for a target doing 200 miles per hour at altitude, never fired at something 12,000 feet above him. The training manual for the Bofors was specific. Effective range against aircraft, 4,000 yards horizontal. Maximum practical ceiling, 8,000 feet. Rate of fire, 120 rounds per minute. Crew, 4 men normally. Gunner, loader, 2 ammunition handlers. The gun could be operated by 1 man if necessary. But accuracy suffered. Response time increased. Effectiveness decreased. Hendricks knew the basics. Point the gun at the target. Use the shoulder brace to steady your aim. Track the target with the traversing mechanism. Elevate or depress with the elevation wheel. Calculate lead based on target speed and distance. Fire in bursts, 3 to 5 seconds, 20 to 25 rounds per burst. Watch your tracers. Adjust aim based on where they go. Simple in theory, impossible in practice if you'd never done it before. The morning of December 18th started like every morning at Bastogne. Cold, dark. The sound of distant artillery. Hendricks was in his foxhole at 5:15 a.m. His shift on ammunition detail started at 5:30. He climbed out of the hole. Frost covered everything. The ground was frozen solid. His boots crunched on ice. He walked 200 yards to the ammunition supply point. Picked up 4 boxes of 40mm rounds. Each box weighed 38 pounds. He carried 2 boxes at a time. Made 2 trips. Delivered them to 3 different gun positions along the southern perimeter. The 3rd position was Sergeant Morrison's Bofors gun. Morrison was 32 years old. Regular Army. 12 years in service. He'd been firing anti-aircraft guns since 1937. He knew the Bofors like some men knew their wives. Every mechanical quirk, every adjustment needed for cold weather, every trick for getting maximum effective range. Morrison was checking the gun when Hendricks arrived with ammunition. 5:28 a.m. The sky was just starting to lighten. Gray light, no sun. Morrison was wearing his helmet, field jacket, wool gloves with the trigger fingers cut out. Hendricks set the ammunition boxes down. Morrison nodded. "Thanks, kid." That was the last conversation they had. At 5:33 a.m., German artillery opened up. Not a major barrage, harassment fire, standard morning routine. 6 shells landed in 90 seconds, 88mm rounds, high explosive. They impacted randomly across the southern perimeter. 1 shell hit near a machine gun position, 1 hit in an open field, 1 hit near a supply dump, 1 hit 40 feet from Morrison's gun position. Morrison was standing next to the Bofors, adjusting the elevation mechanism. Hendricks had just turned to walk away, heading back for more ammunition. He was 15 feet away when the shell landed. The explosion was instant. Sound and pressure and heat. Hendricks went down, ears ringing, face in the frozen dirt, tasted blood. Didn't know if it was his. He looked up. Smoke. Dust. The Bofors was still there, tilted slightly but operational. Morrison was on the ground, not moving. Hendricks crawled toward him. Morrison was on his back, eyes open, breathing. 3 pieces of shrapnel had hit him. Left shoulder, right leg, lower abdomen. Blood was soaking through his jacket, dark red. Too much blood. Hendricks yelled for medics, kept yelling until they came. 2 men with Red Cross armbands. They arrived in 4 minutes. Felt like 40. They knelt beside Morrison, checked wounds, started applying pressure bandages. Morrison was conscious, talking. His voice was steady. Shock, probably. "Someone needs to man that gun," he said, blood on his lips when he spoke. "Can't leave it unmanned. Germans fly over every morning." One medic said, "You're going to the aid station." Morrison said, "Gun first. Get someone on the gun." The medics lifted him onto a stretcher, started carrying him toward the aid station. Morrison was still talking. "That gun. Get someone on that gun." Lieutenant Hastings appeared, 24 years old, platoon leader. He'd heard the explosion, came to check casualties. He looked at Morrison being carried away, looked at the Bofors, looked around for a replacement gunner. Every trained AA gunner was already assigned. Every position was manned. There were no reserves, no replacements. Everyone who knew how to fire a Bofors was already firing one. Hastings saw Hendricks, standing there, blood on his face from a small cut, otherwise fine. "You," Hastings said. "You know how to work a Bofors?" Hendricks hesitated. "I fired one twice in training, sir. Ground targets." Hastings looked at the gun, looked at Hendricks, made a decision. "Good enough. You're on the gun until I find a replacement." Hendricks wanted to argue, wanted to say he wasn't trained, wasn't qualified, wasn't ready. "But you didn't argue with officers. You said yes, sir, and followed orders." "Yes, sir," Hendricks said. Hastings walked away, back to his command post, back to the 100 other problems he had that morning. Hendricks walked to the Bofors. It was still functional. The shell had landed close, but not close enough to damage the mechanism. He checked the traversing gear. Worked fine. Checked the elevation controls. Fine. Checked the ammunition feed. 240 rounds loaded, ready to fire. Morrison's blood was on the gun trail. Dark spots in the snow. Being carried away to an aid station where surgeons would try to save his life with limited supplies and too many casualties and not enough time. Hendricks was alone at the gun. 19 years old, 3 weeks in combat. 2 training shots on a Bofors, both at stationary targets. Now he was responsible for anti-aircraft defense on the southern perimeter of Bastogne. Responsible for shooting down German reconnaissance aircraft that flew at 12,000 feet, 4,000 feet above effective range. He sat in the gunner's seat, put his hands on the controls. They were shaking, not from the cold, though it was still 8 degrees, from fear, from the knowledge that he had no idea what he was doing, from the understanding that 18,000 surrounded soldiers were depending on him and everyone like him to do jobs they barely knew how to do. The sky was getting lighter. Gray dawn. Clouds at 3,000 feet. Somewhere above those clouds, 9 German bombers were warming engines, preparing for their daily reconnaissance flight. They'd be over Bastogne in less than 2 hours. And 3 miles south, hidden under camouflage netting and snow, 38 Panther tanks were preparing to attack. Commanders checking maps, loaders checking ammunition, drivers testing engines, all of them waiting for 8 o'clock, waiting for the order to advance, waiting to break through the American line and collapse the pocket and kill everyone inside. Hendricks didn't know about the tanks. Nobody knew. That was the whole point of camouflage, of night movement, of good German tactical discipline. But in 68 minutes, Hendricks would fire his gun at the wrong target, at the wrong angle, at the wrong time. Would violate every doctrine in the training manual. Would waste ammunition on an impossible shot. And would accidentally save 1,600 American lives. At 7:43 a.m., Hendricks heard engines. High altitude, distant. The sound came from the north. He looked up, saw contrails, thin white lines against gray sky, aircraft in formation, 9 of them, V pattern, standard German reconnaissance formation. Heinkel He 111 bombers, twin-engine aircraft, cruising speed 210 miles per hour, service ceiling 27,000 feet, normal reconnaissance altitude over Bastogne 12,000 feet, maybe higher today. The contrails suggested high altitude. Cold air at altitude made condensation trails more visible. Hendricks watched them approach. They were 3 miles out when he first heard them. He had maybe 90 seconds before they'd be directly overhead. 90 seconds to decide what to do. The Bofors gun could traverse 360 degrees, could elevate from -5 degrees to +90 degrees. Hendricks cranked the elevation wheel. The barrel lifted, pointed skyward. He estimated the aircraft altitude. 12,000 feet, maybe 13,000, definitely above 10,000. He knew the manual. Effective Bofors ceiling against aircraft, 8,000 feet for practical engagement. Maximum ceiling with reduced accuracy, 9,000 feet in perfect conditions. These aircraft were 4,000 feet above that. Standard doctrine was clear. Don't waste ammunition on targets outside effective range. Conserve ammunition for viable targets. Wait for aircraft at lower altitude. The Germans had been flying these reconnaissance missions for 6 days. Every morning, same pattern. High altitude, untouchable. American anti-aircraft guns had fired at them. All misses. Eventually, orders came down. Stop wasting ammunition. Let them fly. Wait for targets you can actually hit. But Hendricks was 19 years old, 3 weeks in combat. First time alone on an anti-aircraft gun. He wasn't thinking about doctrine. He was thinking about 18,000 surrounded soldiers, about German bombers overhead photographing American positions, about Morrison bleeding in the aid station, about doing something instead of nothing. The aircraft were directly overhead now, 2 miles up, maybe more. Hendricks could see them clearly. Dark shapes against gray sky, formation perfect. They weren't even evading, didn't need to. They knew American guns couldn't reach them. Hendricks made his decision. He traversed the gun, tracked the lead aircraft. His hands were steadier now. Fear did that sometimes. Made you steady when you needed to be. He elevated to maximum angle. 45 degrees. The barrel pointed almost straight up. Now he needed to calculate lead. Aircraft moving at 210 miles per hour. Distance, 12,000 feet. Time for shell to reach that altitude, maybe 6 seconds. Shell velocity, 2,870 feet per second. But gravity slowed the shell as it climbed. Terminal velocity at 12,000 feet would be much less. Hendricks didn't do the math, couldn't do the math. He just guessed, looked at where the aircraft was, guessed where it would be in 6 seconds. Aimed the gun at that empty piece of sky. Except he guessed wrong. He thought the aircraft were moving faster than they actually were. Added too much lead. The gun was pointing at a spot the aircraft would never reach. His right hand gripped the firing mechanism. Butterfly trigger. Squeeze both sides simultaneously. The gun would fire as long as he held the trigger. Release to stop. Hendricks took a breath. His breath came out as white vapor. 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to see every exhale. He squeezed the trigger. The Bofors hammered. The sound was distinctive. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Thump, 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 thump. 120 rounds per minute. 2 rounds per second. The gun shook with each shot. Recoil absorbed by the mount. The barrel jumped slightly with each round. Hendricks held the trigger for 10 seconds. 20 rounds fired. Automatic mechanism ejected spent casings. They clattered onto the frozen ground. Brass cases steaming in the cold air. The 40mm shells climbed. Each shell weighed 2.31 pounds. High explosive rounds. Contact fuse. They'd explode on impact with anything solid. Aircraft, ground, nothing. Every 5th round was a tracer. Bright orange phosphorus. They left visible trails. Hendricks watched them climb. 4 bright lines reaching toward the bombers. Orange streaks against gray sky. The shells climbed to 8,000 feet, 9,000. The tracers were still visible, still climbing. Hendricks watched them arc through the air, watched them reach what looked like 10,000 feet. Then they stopped climbing. Gravity won. Terminal velocity reached 0. The shells hung in the air for a fraction of a second, then fell back toward Earth. The aircraft flew on, untouched, not even close. Hendricks' guess on lead was wrong. His guess on altitude was wrong. His guess on everything was wrong. Complete miss. Not a single shell within 1,000 feet of any aircraft. The Germans probably didn't even notice. Probably didn't see the tracers. They were focused on photography. Cameras pointed down, recording American positions for artillery targeting. Hendricks released the trigger. The gun fell silent. He sat there feeling like an idiot. He'd just wasted 20 rounds of 40mm ammunition, violated direct orders about conserving ammunition, fired at a target everyone knew was out of range. Lieutenant Hastings was going to hear about this. Probably relieve him from the gun, send him back to ammunition bearer duty, or worse. But 400 yards west, Captain Thomas Winters was watching through binoculars. Winters was 31 years old. Battalion S2, intelligence officer, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. His job was intelligence gathering, enemy positions, movements, strength. He spent most of his time scanning the perimeter with binoculars, looking for Germans, looking for threats, looking for anything that might kill American soldiers. He'd been scanning the southern approach when he heard the Bofors fire. Single gun. Short burst. He looked up, saw the tracers arcing into the sky, watched them climb, watched them fall back. Waste of ammunition, he thought. But the tracers created something Winters hadn't seen before. Illumination. The morning was gray, overcast. Not dark but not bright. Flat light, no shadows. That kind of light made camouflage extremely effective. Made it hard to distinguish natural terrain from man-made objects. Made it easy for Germans to hide. But the tracers changed that. 4 bright orange lines climbing through gray sky created light and shadow. Created contrast. The shells fell back to earth. Some exploded on impact with the ground. Small flashes 3 miles south. The flashes created momentary illumination on the ground below. And in that light, Winters saw shapes. Unnatural shapes. Regular patterns. Straight lines where nature didn't make straight lines. He adjusted his binoculars, focused on the area where the shells had fallen. 3 miles south, open farmland, snow-covered fields, some scattered trees. He saw camouflage netting, German winter camouflage, white with irregular gray patterns, designed to blend with snow. It worked perfectly in flat light, but the tracer illumination created shadow underneath the netting. Made it visible, made it obvious. Winters moved his binoculars slowly, scanned the area, saw more netting, saw shapes underneath. Tank shapes, turrets. Track patterns in snow, partially covered but visible in the right light. He counted. 10 tanks visible from his position. All Panthers. Distinctive shape. Sloped front armor. Long 75mm gun. Exhaust ports, vision blocks. He counted again. 12 tanks. No, 15. He shifted his viewing angle slightly. Saw more. 20 tanks. 25. This wasn't a platoon. This was a company. Maybe more. Winters called to his radio operator, Private First Class Eddie Morrison. No relation to the wounded AA gunner. Morrison was 20 feet away, manning the SCR 300 radio. Battalion Command Net. Morrison, get me Battalion TOC right now. Morrison keyed the handset. Silver 6, this is Silver 2 actual. Over. Silver 6 was Battalion Tactical Operations Center, the command post. The voice that came back was the radio operator there. Silver 2 actual, this is Silver 6, send traffic over. Get me the old man, Winters said. The old man meant the battalion commander. Major Ronald Stevens, 42 years old, West Point graduate, 15 years in service. He'd been commanding 2nd Battalion since September. 30 seconds. Then Stevens' voice on the radio. Silver 2 actual, this is 6 actual, go ahead. Winters pressed the transmit button. 6 actual, I have enemy armor. Southern approach, grid coordinates. He read the coordinates from his map. At least 10 visible, probably more. Perfect camouflage. I only spotted them because of AA tracer illumination. Request immediate artillery, over. Silence for 3 seconds. Stevens was processing. Enemy armor. Southern approach. That was the weakest section of the American line. 2 battalions. Limited anti-tank capability. If German armor broke through there, the entire pocket collapsed. Stevens' voice came back. Silver 2 actual. Confirm enemy armor. How many vehicles? Over. Still counting. 6 actual. At least 15 visible now. Probably more concealed. All Panthers. Formation suggests 2 companies minimum. Maybe battalion strength. They're in assault positions. Engines probably running. This looks like pre-attack staging. Over. Another pause. Longer this time. 5 seconds. Stevens was thinking. Making decisions. German tank battalion 3 miles from American line. Dawn attack position. This was the assault everyone had been expecting. Silver 2 actual. Continue observation. Get exact count and precise coordinates. I'm calling division artillery. How did you spot them with camouflage? Over. Some kid on a Bofors fired at reconnaissance aircraft, way out of range. Tracers arced up and fell near the German position. Illuminated the ground just right. Created shadows under their camouflage netting. Pure luck. Over. Stevens actually laughed. Brief. Bitter. Sometimes luck beats training. Give me fire mission coordinates. 6 actual out. Winters went back to his binoculars. Counted carefully now. Methodical. Left to right. Row by row. Tanks were positioned in 3 rows. 12 in front. 13 in second row. 13 in third row. Total. 38 Panthers. 2 full companies. Battalion strength. All in attack formation. Front row. 100 yard spacing between vehicles. Second row, offset positions. Third row, reserve or exploitation force. This was textbook German armor doctrine. Breakthrough formation. The front row would hit American lines simultaneously. Create multiple penetration points. Second row would exploit gaps. Third row would pour through and attack rear areas. Attack time was probably minutes away. Maybe they were waiting for artillery preparation. Maybe waiting for reconnaissance photos. Maybe just waiting for orders. Winters called coordinates to battalion. Stevens relayed them to division artillery. 6 batteries were available. Mix of 105mm and 155mm howitzers. Total tubes, 72 guns, all within range of the German position. At 7:48 a.m., 5 minutes after Hendricks fired his Bofors, American artillery received the fire mission. Enemy armor. Grid coordinates, priority target, all available batteries, time on target, fire for effect. Gunners cranked their elevation wheels. Loaders prepared shells. Fire direction calculated ballistic data. Range, 8,300 yards. Charge, 6. Elevation, 412 mils. Azimuth, 1,800 mils. At 7:50 a.m., the first ranging shots, fired. 4 rounds, 1 from each battery type. They needed to verify accuracy before committing all 72 tubes. The shells took 28 seconds in flight. Arced over Bastogne. Dropped toward the German position 3 miles south. 2 shells landed short. 100 yards in front of the tank formation. 2 shells landed beyond. 200 yards past. Pattern showed left deflection. Fire direction called adjustment. Left 200, add 100. Second ranging shots. 7:52 a.m. Better pattern. 1 shell landed directly in the tank formation. Exploded between 2 Panthers. Shrapnel rattled off armor. No penetration, but the Germans noticed. Tank commanders noticed. They'd been sitting in assault positions for 3 hours. Camouflaged. Silent. Waiting. Now, American artillery was landing on their position. That meant one thing. Americans had spotted them. Surprise was gone. The attack plan was compromised. German company commander made a decision. Attack now. Don't wait for orders. Don't wait for artillery preparation. Attack immediately while Americans were still preparing. Speed might save the surprise advantage. Radio calls went to all tank commanders. Execute assault. All vehicles advance. Maximum speed. 38 Panther engines roared. Transmissions engaged. Tracks bit into frozen ground. The entire formation began moving. 25 miles per hour across snow-covered farmland. Heading north. Heading toward American lines. Heading toward 1,600 soldiers who had no anti-tank defenses and no warning. Except they did have warning. 4 minutes of warning. Because Captain Winters had seen tracers illuminate camouflage. Because he'd called artillery. Because American gunners were already firing. Because one 19-year-old kid had violated doctrine and fired at aircraft he couldn't hit and created light where Germans thought there was only shadow. At 7:52 a.m., American artillery fired for effect. All 72 tubes. Simultaneous fire. Time on target. All shells arriving within 5 seconds of each other. The sky over the German position exploded. 72 high-explosive shells in a 300-yard circle. The sound was continuous thunder. The ground shook. Snow vaporized. Camouflage netting shredded. 3 Panthers took direct hits. 2 mobility kills. 1 catastrophic. Turret blown 30 feet in the air. The remaining 35 Panthers kept advancing. German tank doctrine. Attack through artillery. Don't stop. Movement is survival. The bombardment was terrible, but stopping was worse. They accelerated. 30 miles per hour now. Commanders buttoned up, hatches closed. Vision through periscopes only. Reduced visibility, but better protection. 3 miles to American lines. 6 minutes at current speed. 6 minutes to contact. 6 minutes to find out if 1,600 Americans could stop 35 Panthers with nothing but rifles and bazookas and desperate courage. But they'd have 6 minutes to prepare. 6 minutes to position bazooka teams. 6 minutes to call more artillery. 6 minutes they wouldn't have had if Hendricks hadn't fired 20 rounds at aircraft he missed completely. The 2 battalions on the southern perimeter had 4 minutes warning. 4 minutes between Captain Winters' radio call and 35 Panthers reaching their line. 4 minutes that changed everything. 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment held the western half of the southern perimeter. 2nd Battalion, 327th Glider Infantry Regiment held the eastern half. Total strength, 1,600 men, give or take. Casualties from 6 days of siege had reduced both battalions below nominal strength. Some companies were at 60%, some at 70%. Nobody was at full strength. Their defensive positions were hasty, foxholes dug into frozen ground, some interconnecting trenches, a few sandbagged machine gun positions. Nothing prepared, nothing reinforced. They'd been surrounded for 6 days. Spent most of that time fighting off probing attacks, dodging artillery, trying not to freeze. Nobody had time to build proper fortifications. Anti-tank defenses were minimal. They had bazookas, M9A1 rocket launcher, 2.36-inch diameter, effective range, 300 yards maximum. Penetration capability, adequate against side and rear armor of most German tanks. Marginal against Panther front armor. The Panther's front plate was 120 millimeters thick, sloped at 55 degrees. That gave it effective thickness of 217 millimeters. The bazooka could penetrate maybe 100 millimeters under ideal conditions. Side shots or rear shots could kill a Panther. Front shots probably wouldn't. The math was simple. Get beside the tank or behind it. Don't engage from the front unless you had no choice. Each battalion had maybe 20 bazookas, 40 total across the southern perimeter, 2-man teams, gunner and loader. The gunner carried the launcher, 5 feet long, 13 pounds. The loader carried the rockets, 3.4 pounds each, usually carried 6 rounds, more if they could manage the weight. Before winter's radio call, before the warning, most bazooka teams were in their foxholes. Cold, tired, eating breakfast if they had any. K rations, cold hash, crackers. Some had coffee. Most didn't. The supply situation was that bad. At 7:48 a.m., when artillery started firing, company commanders got radio calls. Enemy armor approaching. Southern sector. Unknown strength. Prepare anti-tank defense. 4 minutes to reorganize. 4 minutes to move bazooka teams forward. 4 minutes to position them in spots where they might get flank shots. 4 minutes to brief them on what was coming. 4 minutes to prepare instead of getting surprised. Lieutenant James Parker commanded Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th PIR, 23 years old. West Point graduate. Class of 1943. He'd been in command for 2 weeks. Previous commander killed by artillery on December 6th. Parker got the radio call at 7:49. He had 6 bazooka teams in his company, 12 men. He called them forward. Runners went to each foxhole. Bazooka teams report to CP immediately. The teams came. They knew what an immediate call meant. Something bad was happening, something that needed rockets. Parker gathered them at his command post. A reinforced foxhole with a tarpaulin roof. He had a map spread on an ammunition crate, pointed to the southern approach. German armor inbound. Unknown strength. Artillery's hitting them now. They'll be here in minutes. I need teams at these positions. He marked 3 spots on the map. Here, here, and here. Flanking positions. Let them roll past. Hit them from the side. Don't engage from the front. You won't penetrate. The teams moved out. Running. Crouched low. German artillery was landing randomly. Always was. Running in artillery was dangerous. Staying in one place was worse. They reached their positions, found spots with good sight lines and some cover. Got down. Waited. To the east, other companies were doing the same thing. Moving bazooka teams forward, positioning them for flank shots. Artillery liaison officers were calling fire missions. Adjust fire south. Hit the armor. Keep hitting it. Don't let them assemble. Don't let them organize. Machine gun crews were repositioning, moving guns to angles where they could provide suppressive fire. Machine guns couldn't kill tanks, but they could kill tank commanders who opened hatches for better visibility, could kill infantry supporting the tanks, could force tanks to button up and reduce their effectiveness. Riflemen were spreading out, finding positions where they could engage supporting infantry, where they could provide cover for bazooka teams, where they could fall back if the line broke. 4 minutes of preparation. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was everything. Without those 4 minutes, the attack would have achieved complete surprise. Bazooka teams would have been in their holes, unprepared. By the time they realized tanks were coming, the tanks would be on top of them. Overrunning positions, breaking through. No time to position for flank shots. No time to coordinate. No time to do anything except die. But they had 4 minutes. And 1,600 men used those 4 minutes as well as any soldiers could. At 7:54 a.m., the 1st Panther came into visual range of American positions. Distance, 1,000 yards. The tank was moving fast, 30 miles per hour, snow spraying from its tracks. Commander's hatch open. He needed visibility. Closed hatches reduced vision to narrow periscope slits. Open hatch meant vulnerability, but meant seeing the battlefield. American artillery was still falling. Shells impacted across the tank formation. One shell landed directly on a Panther. The tank shuddered, kept moving. The shell had hit the front glacis plate, 120 millimeters of armor. The high explosive round didn't penetrate, just scarred the armor. The tank was fine. But artillery was disrupting formation. Tanks were spreading out, losing cohesion. Some were moving faster to get through the artillery beaten zone. Others were slowing to maintain spacing. The neat 3-row formation from 20 minutes ago was gone. Now it was 35 individual tanks attacking on a 2-mile front. Still dangerous, still lethal, but less coordinated, less effective. At 800 yards, the lead Panther fired its main gun. 75mm KWK-42, high velocity, muzzle velocity, 3,680 feet per second. Extremely accurate, extremely deadly. The shell hit an American foxhole, direct hit. The foxhole disappeared, replaced by a crater. 3 soldiers had been in that hole. None survived. More Panthers were in range now. 8 tanks, 10, 12. They opened fire, main guns and machine guns. 75mm shells and 7.92mm MG-34 fire, high explosive and ball ammunition. The southern perimeter erupted in explosions and bullets. American infantry returned fire. M1 Garand rifles, M1918 A2 Browning automatic rifles, 30 caliber machine guns, small arms fire against armor, ineffective. Bullets bounced off tank hulls, made sparks, made noise, did nothing. But the bazooka teams were waiting. They'd positioned at angles, 45 degrees off the axis of advance. The Panthers were moving straight north. The bazooka teams were east and west of that line. As tanks passed, the teams would have flank shots. The first Panther reached the American line at 7:56. Distance from bazooka team, 200 yards. Perfect range. The team was Corporal James Wilson and Private Robert Chen. Wilson was the gunner. Chen was the loader. They'd trained together for 6 months. Knew each other's movements. Worked like one organism. Chen tapped Wilson's shoulder. Loaded. Wilson had the Panther in his sight. The tank was moving left to right across his field of view. Speed, 25 miles per hour. That's 36.6 feet per second. At 200 yards, time to target for the rocket, 0.4 seconds. In that time, the tank would move 14.64 feet. Wilson aimed 14 feet ahead of the tank, exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The bazooka fired. Back blast 30 feet behind the team, flames and smoke. The rocket launched. Speed, 265 feet per second. 2 pounds of pentalite explosive, shaped charge warhead. Could penetrate armor through focused blast rather than kinetic impact. Flight time, 0.42 seconds. The rocket streaked toward where Wilson had aimed. The Panther moved into that space. Perfect timing. The rocket hit the tank's lower hull, side armor. 60 millimeters thick. The shaped charge penetrated. Explosion inside the tank. Fuel tanks ruptured. Secondary explosion. Orange flames shot from every hatch and vision port. The tank stopped. Crew bailed out. 3 men, burning, rolling in snow trying to extinguish flames. One didn't make it out. First kill. 7:56 a.m. Wilson and Chen moved immediately. Doctrine said relocate after firing. Tanks would target your position. They low-crawled 30 feet east, found a shell crater, got down. Chen loaded another rocket. They waited for another target. Across the southern perimeter, other teams were engaging. Some hit, some missed. Panthers were moving fast. Erratic patterns. They'd learned from the first kill. New bazookas were active, started jinking, changing speed, changing direction, made them harder targets. But American teams kept firing. Second kill came at 7:57. Panther hit in the engine compartment. Rear shot. Engine fire. Crew abandoned the vehicle. Third kill. 7:58. Track hit. Mobility kill. Tank immobilized, but turret still operational. It sat in place firing at American positions. Killed 4 soldiers before artillery got it. But Panthers were killing too. A bazooka team fired from too close. 100 yards. The Panthers' turret traversed. Machine gun fire. Both Americans dead in 3 seconds. Another team got a hit that didn't penetrate. Front shot. Desperation. The rocket just scarred the armor. The tank fired back. 75mm high explosive. Direct hit. Both Americans gone. Panthers reached American foxholes. Ran over positions. Crushed soldiers who couldn't get out in time. Machine guns killed soldiers who ran. Main guns killed soldiers who fought. It was brutal. Close range. Personal. The kind of combat where you saw faces, saw fear, saw death up close. But the American line held. Barely. Bazooka teams kept getting flank shots. Artillery kept falling. Machine guns kept firing. The Panthers couldn't break through. They'd lost surprise, lost momentum, lost coordination. They were individual tanks fighting individual fights instead of a coordinated battalion assault. At 8:03, a Panther broke through. Got past the forward positions, headed for battalion command post. Lieutenant Parker saw it coming. 200 yards, 150. Machine gun fire bounced off the armor. The tank's turret turned toward Parker's position. Then Corporal Martinez appeared. He'd been hit earlier. Shrapnel in his left arm. Bleeding. Should have been at the aid station. Instead, he was running toward the Panther from the side. Bazooka on his shoulder. No loader. Just him. He got to 60 yards. Stopped. Knelt. Aimed. The Panther was turning. Turret coming toward him. Seconds from firing. Martinez fired first. Side shot. Upper hull. The rocket penetrated. Explosion. The Panther stopped. Martinez collapsed. Blood loss. Parker sent medics. Martinez survived. Got a silver star later. Didn't care about the medal. Cared that he stopped the tank. The battle lasted 42 minutes. 7:54 to 8:36. 42 minutes of concentrated violence. Tanks and rockets and artillery and small arms. 1,600 Americans versus 35 Panthers. The math said the Germans should win, should break through, should collapse the pocket. But math doesn't account for warning, doesn't account for preparation, doesn't account for 4 minutes to position bazooka teams instead of getting surprised. German losses at 8:36. 11 Panthers destroyed. Complete losses, burning hulks, 7 more damaged or immobilized. Mobility kills or partial damage. 18 total casualties out of 35 engaged. 51% losses, unsustainable. The remaining 16 Panthers withdrew, pulled back south. The attack was over. American losses, 87 killed, 133 wounded, 12 missing, probably dead. 232 total casualties out of 1,600 engaged, 14.5%. 2 positions had been overrun, 40 yards of front line lost. But the line held. The perimeter was intact. Bastogne was still surrounded, but not broken. 18,000 men were still fighting. Post-battle analysis came later. After the siege ended, after Patton's relief column broke through, after historians could study reports and count costs and calculate what might have been. Battalion intelligence officers did the math. Estimated casualties if the attack had achieved surprise. If bazooka teams hadn't been positioned. If artillery hadn't been ready. If soldiers had been caught unprepared. Conservative estimate, 400 killed, 800 wounded, 1,200 casualties. 75% casualty rate in the engaged battalions. Both units rendered combat ineffective. Southern perimeter collapsed. German armor penetrating into Bastogne. Pocket split in half. 18,000 surrounded soldiers divided into isolated groups. Defeat in detail would follow. The entire siege might have ended differently, might have failed, might have cost thousands more lives, because one 19-year-old kid violated doctrine, fired at aircraft out of range, created tracer illumination that revealed 38 hidden tanks, gave 4 minutes warning that saved 1,600 lives and preserved the southern perimeter and kept Bastogne from falling. Hendricks didn't know any of this yet. He was still at his Bofors gun. He'd watched the battle from his position, heard it, seen artillery falling, seen tanks burning 3 miles south, heard the radio traffic, listened to reports of casualties and kills and desperation. He thought he'd failed, thought his wild shot at reconnaissance aircraft had wasted ammunition, thought he'd be relieved from the gun. Maybe disciplined. He had no idea he'd saved 1,600 men. Had no idea his mistake was the most important thing that happened that morning. Had no idea that 4 minutes of warning, created by tracers arcing through gray December sky, had changed the entire battle. But other people knew. Captain Winters knew. Major Stevens knew. Every soldier on the southern perimeter who'd had time to prepare, time to position, time to fight instead of die surprised. They knew. And in 4 hours, Hendricks would know too. At 8:45 a.m., the battle was over. Hendricks was still at the Bofors position. He'd sat there for 3 hours, watching, listening. He'd heard the artillery, seen the explosions 3 miles south, watched smoke rise from burning tanks, heard radio traffic on the command net, casualty reports, ammunition requests, desperate calls for more bazooka teams. He didn't understand his role in any of it. He'd fired at aircraft, missed completely, wasted 20 rounds. That was his contribution. A mistake that accomplished nothing. At least that's what he thought. Captain Winters found him at 8:52. Walked from his observation post to the gun position. 400 yards. Winters' uniform was covered in dirt. His face was streaked with soot. He'd been calling artillery missions for an hour. Adjusting fire. Directing shells onto German positions. His voice was hoarse from shouting into radio handsets. He stopped in front of the Bofors, looked at Hendricks. Hendricks stood immediately. Came to attention, expected the reprimand he knew was coming. Winters said, "What's your name, soldier?" "Private First Class Hendricks, sir." "You fired at those reconnaissance aircraft this morning." "Oh, 743. "Yes, sir." Hendricks kept his eyes forward. Didn't make eye contact. "I know they were out of range, sir. I know I missed. I apologize for wasting ammunition, sir. It won't happen again." Winters stared at him for 5 seconds, then said something Hendricks didn't expect. "Son, your tracers lit up 38 German Panther tanks. We had no idea they were there. Perfect camouflage. We would never have seen them. You gave us 4 minutes warning, 4 minutes to position bazooka teams, 4 minutes to call artillery, 4 minutes to prepare instead of getting overrun. You just saved 1,600 American lives." Hendricks didn't understand at first. The words didn't make sense. Tracers, tanks, saved lives. How? Winters explained. The tracers arcing through the sky, falling near the German position, creating illumination, shadow and light on camouflage netting, making visible what had been invisible. The artillery response, the defensive preparation. 4 minutes that changed everything. Hendricks sat down. Didn't ask permission, just sat on the gun trail. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. He started shaking. Not from cold, not from fear. From the realization of what had almost happened. What would have happened? 38 tanks hitting unprepared positions. 1,600 men with no warning. No anti-tank teams positioned. No artillery ready. Just soldiers in foxholes waiting to die. His mistake, his violation of doctrine, his waste of ammunition, had prevented that. Winters put a hand on his shoulder. Get some rest. You've earned it. Then Winters walked away, back to his observation post, back to watching for the next threat, back to the war that never stopped. Hendricks sat there alone, the Bofors gun silent, ammunition boxes stacked nearby, the smell of burned propellant still in the air. His hands had stopped shaking. His breathing was steady, but his mind was spinning, trying to process, trying to understand. He'd saved 1,600 men by making a mistake. By noon, everyone in the pocket knew the story. 18,000 surrounded soldiers, word spread through companies and battalions and regiments. Passed from foxhole to foxhole, from command post to aid station. The story changed slightly with each telling. Details shifted. Numbers varied. But the core remained the same. A kid on an AA gun fired at aircraft out of range. Tracers revealed hidden German tanks. Artillery responded. Infantry prepared. Attack was stopped. Lives were saved. Some versions said Hendricks fired deliberately to illuminate the ground. That he knew the tanks were there. That he used the tracers as flares. Those versions were wrong, but they spread anyway. Made better stories. Made Hendricks sound like a tactical genius instead of a scared 19-year-old who violated doctrine because he didn't know better. Other versions were closer to truth. Said he fired out of nervousness, out of inexperience, out of desperation to do something. Those versions were more accurate, less heroic, but honest. Officers came to see him. Battalion commander, regimental commander, Major Stevens from 2nd Battalion, Colonel Sink, who commanded 506th PIR. Even General McAuliffe, division commander, sent his executive officer to get the story firsthand. Everyone wanted to meet the kid who accidentally saved the southern perimeter. Hendricks didn't feel like a hero. Felt like he'd gotten lucky. Lucky that his tracers fell near tanks. Lucky that someone was watching with binoculars. Lucky that artillery was available. Lucky that 4 minutes was enough time. But Major Stevens disagreed. He came to the gun position at 1300 hours, found Hendricks cleaning the Bofors, removing spent casings, checking the mechanism, standard maintenance. Stevens said, "You think you got lucky?" "Yes, sir." "You're wrong. Luck is random. What you did was initiative. You saw enemy aircraft. You took action. Training said don't fire. Doctrine said conserve ammunition. Experience said wait. But you fired anyway. You did something instead of nothing. That's not luck. That's decision-making under pressure." Hendricks said, "Sir, I missed the aircraft. I wasted ammunition. I violated doctrine." "You violated doctrine and saved 1,600 lives." Sometimes doctrine is wrong. Sometimes the manual doesn't account for specific circumstances. Sometimes doing the wrong thing by the book is the right thing for the situation. Stevens paused. If Morrison had been on this gun, trained and experienced, he probably wouldn't have fired. Training would have stopped him. Doctrine would have stopped him. You didn't know enough to let that stop you. Sometimes inexperience makes better decisions than experience. Stevens left. Hendricks kept cleaning the gun, kept thinking about what Stevens said, about doctrine and decisions, about experience and inexperience, about Morrison, who would have followed the rules and missed the chance. He thought about the southern perimeter, about 1,600 men who'd had 4 minutes to prepare, about 87 who'd died anyway, about how many more would have died without warning. 400, Stevens said. Maybe more. Conservative estimate based on surprise attack casualties. 313 lives saved. By 20 rounds of 40mm ammunition fired at the wrong target. The war didn't stop for reflection. At 1400 hours, German artillery started up again. Random harassment fire, same as always. Hendricks stayed at his gun, watched the sky, waited for more aircraft. They came at 15:30. 9 Heinkel bombers, same formation, same altitude, 12,000 feet, out of range. This time Hendricks didn't fire. He'd learned his lesson, or thought he had. He watched them fly over, watched them photograph American positions, let them go. But he wondered if his tracers might illuminate something else, might reveal another hidden threat, might give another 4 minutes warning that saved more lives. He didn't fire, followed doctrine, conserved ammunition, did what training said to do. Later he wondered if that was the right decision. Wondered if sometimes making mistakes was better than following rules. Wondered if the entire war was just thousands of soldiers making thousands of decisions, some right and some wrong, and nobody knowing which was which until after. By evening, the story had reached other divisions. Radio traffic carried it. Liaison officers spread it. Someone on an AA gun at Bastogne spotted German tanks with tracers. Gave warning. Saved a battalion. Other anti-aircraft gunners heard it. Started thinking about tracers differently. Started thinking about illumination as a secondary function. Started thinking about using AA fire for purposes the manual never mentioned.